Okay. All right, welcome again. I think we have critical mass and a good number of folks on and more joining as we kick things off here. So I'd love to start out by just saying hello and welcome to everyone who has made time to join us today. As I said just a few moments ago, I'm Sara Kerr. I'm the Vice President for Education Policy Implementation at Results for America, and really excited to have and be a part of this conversation today. I want to thank everyone for joining us for what is our inaugural Examining the Evidence event. This is the first in what will be a series of opportunities for bringing researchers, policymakers, and importantly, practitioners together in meaningful and hopefully practical conversation about issues that education leaders all across the country are facing as we respond to and recover from the COVID health pandemic facing our country right now. Events like this one today are really intended to complement the broader project that we at Results for America launched in partnership with the Annenberg Institute for School Reform at Brown University just last week. And in a moment, we'll hear more about that project from my project co-lead, Nate Schwartz. But before handing things over to him, I want to briefly note a few quick housekeeping items for all of you who are joining us today to participate in this conversation. So first, for your awareness, we are recording the event today and we'll make that recording available on our website, the EdResearch for Recovery website, which we'll include in the chat, a link in the chat in a moment. So that will be available following the event. Second, and importantly, we really want to hear from you. Our hope, and this is a challenge with any sort of virtual engagement like this, our hope is that this event will be as interactive as possible. And we're hoping that and invite you to really drop your questions, comments, links to relevant resources that you're aware of into the chat box at any time during today's discussion. We'll be monitoring the chat box closely and pulling questions and comments throughout the conversation and pulling them into the Q&A at the end of our formal conversation with our panelists. So I really encourage everyone to do that. I think our conversation will be much richer for it. And then finally, we'd like to extend a special thanks to the Ohio School for the Deaf and Linda McChesney in particular for joining us today and providing ASL interpretation for the discussion. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Nate Schwartz, who will give us a quick snapshot of the EdResearch for Recovery project and set us up for our conversation. Nate, hello, welcome.
Thank you. I am so excited to join this group for the first event in the series. And I will give a very brief introduction to the project before turning the mic over to our main speakers. As with so many things during this time, this whole project is a work in progress. It grew from a Google spreadsheet that circulated across networks of district and state leaders, with individuals adding questions on topics where they thought research guidance might help them face the new complexities in the COVID and post-COVID world. The project has developed from there into a group of top researchers from across the country who are synthesizing research from their topics of study into a library of actionable briefs for this moment in time. So that means we have a team of researchers from Houston and New York City pulling together what we know about implementing the McKinney-Vento Act to serve students experiencing homelessness. Another team from California and Wisconsin is working to build out guidance on monitoring data around SEL and how to use this sort of diagnostic information as schools restart. We have another team that is thinking about school security, policing, and student safety at this time. A researcher in Chicago is leading that team. And those are just 3 out of some 20 or so topics that we are working on right now and hope to release in the next couple months over a series of waves of releases. So 2 quick things for you, the audience, to keep in mind as you review these briefs and listen to today's discussion. The first is that we would really appreciate it if you could help us turn our questions and areas of need into more of a living document. We want to make this work ever more useful for people like you across all the positions that are represented in this webinar. So please go onto our website, scroll down to the very bottom, and there's a comment box where if you have other questions that aren't being talked about, if you have feedback on how the format or content of their briefs can change and become more useful, or if you want to sign up for alerts as we add additional briefs to the site, all of that is available down there. And please know that we are carefully and individually reading all these comments. The second thing is I want to acknowledge that it can feel a little bit strange to talk about some of these topics as our country is facing an increasing caseload and we are still in the midst of a debate about whether and how to open schools. It's hard to talk about college going when we don't even know if colleges will open or whether teachers will have access to personal protective equipment that will make it safe for them to come back on campus. But I think that that is the point. I think these longer term questions about how to do schooling well in the COVID era matter more than ever. And we need to start talking about them now and thinking through the current state of knowledge so that we can be proactive rather than reactive in how we approach this coming year. So with that, I will turn it over to Vivian Tseng, who is the Senior Vice President for, at the WT Grant Foundation. Vivian is someone I've gotten to know because of her interest in creating tighter and more valuable connections between research and practice, and ensuring that we're all working together to build out a better system of usable knowledge. That makes her the perfect person to moderate today's conversation, which we hope will shed light on the ways that research evidence on how to support high school juniors and seniors as they transition from high school to post-secondary can help shape the way that schools, districts, and other supporting organizations are responding to today's crisis. So with that, I will turn it over to Vivian, and I'm going to sign off video so that you guys can focus on the main speakers. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sara and Nate. I just want to start by thanking them for the tremendous leadership that they have shown in bringing the best available research to the table in this moment of huge crisis. I certainly don't need to convince any of you of that. This pandemic has wreaked havoc throughout our society, and it has laid bare the systemic inequalities that have always been there, but are only being exacerbated at this time. And schools are on the front line of this, and schools are facing unprecedented challenges. And so I think it's really incumbent upon the rest of us in this society to figure out what we can do to best support schools, students, the adults that serve young people in our country, because this is about doing what we need to do to support the next generation of our country so that we can all rise out of this crisis more whole and more humane. And so I'm so thrilled that we're able to be part of this conversation and hopefully provide some useful insights from research as schools tackle this very difficult period. I'm thrilled that we'll be joined by some terrific panelists. Sade Bonilla is an assistant professor in the College of Education at UMass-Amherst, and she will be talking about the research synthesis she has done on how to support high school juniors and seniors in their post-secondary planning and preparation. We have Millard House, who leads the Clarksville-Montgomery County Schools. So he and his staff are on the front lines right now of trying to figure out how to best serve students in the coming fall and throughout the next year. And then we have Patty Diaz-Andrade, who's the new delivery models lead at an organization called OneGoal. And she'll tell us a little bit more about what that organization is, what they do, and what they're seeing on the ground in terms of what schools' needs are. So those are our panelists. We're going to have plenty of time for each of them to share with you a bit about their perspectives. We're going to start by hearing about what are the issues that folks are seeing on the ground in schools and districts. And then we're going to shift. So we're going to start with Patty and with Millard, and then we will shift to Sade to talk to us a little bit about what research can do to better inform back to school planning and implementation to best serve students. So that's our plan for today. I am going to start with Patty. So Patty, tell us a little bit about what OneGoal does, and then tell us about what you are seeing. What's one or two major challenges that you're seeing in terms of schools supporting high school juniors and seniors as they think about and consider post-secondary education?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Vivian, for welcoming us. And thank you, Nate, Sara, and the rest of the Annenberg and Results for America team for organizing this. It's truly a pleasure to be here. I think the comments, regarding the level of uncertainty surrounding reopening and our district and school leaders focus on what that will look like are exactly right. I know that that is 100% where folks' energy is. Millard, I don't envy you in your seat at this moment, but it's why these conversations are so critical and why a moment like this I think is important for us to just anchor in what the opportunity is. OneGoal was founded 11 years ago in Chicago to close the degree divide by enlisting teachers as a critical part of that solution. Over the past 11 years, we've grown across 6 regions: New York, Houston, the Bay Area, Atlanta, and Massachusetts. And about 2 years ago, I joined this team after having launched the Massachusetts region to really think about how our model could evolve to meet the needs at scale of young people who often may not have access to post-secondary planning resources. And so the work, if you've had a chance to look at the briefs and this specific brief, it highlights 2 challenges that we've seen firsthand in those 11 years. The first is the need for one-on-one coaching and advising. And the second is the need for a low-cost, scalable solution that ensures students access post-secondary resources and planning remotely. And we've seen these 2 challenges even before the pandemic. On the first, many of you will know that NACAC reported in 2016 that high school students in underserved communities receive, on average, 38 minutes a year of college advising. 38 minutes. Now, this was before the pandemic. And so in this moment, in the midst of the pandemic, my guess would be that those 38 minutes are almost non-existent. We also know that the student to counselor ratio is typically something like 400 to 1 in some of our most underserved high schools. And the reality is that we haven't set up high schools to be post-secondary advising hubs or solutions, right? And that really is a problem. It's an even bigger problem when we hear reports from economists like Marguerite Rosa or others who are predicting that districts will deprioritize post-secondary and career readiness as a result of this pandemic. And it's understandable, right, given the impact on local economies. And yet, according to the Brookings Institutes, not only have less educated groups not fully recovered from the 2010-11 recession, they started at a lower level of unemployment rates prior to the crisis, such that at this point, among those aged 25 and higher, 72% of those with a bachelor's degree are working compared to just 55% of those with a high school degree. There is a direct connection between the choices that we will make in support of our future workforce to seamlessly transition from high school to a post-secondary pathway and their ability to one day achieve economic freedom. And we saw that play out in 2010-11. We have an opportunity to not make that same mistake. At OneGoal, our solution has been to bring teachers and other adults into the fold, to have other adults share the responsibility of providing college guidance and post-secondary planning. We provide teachers already who are part of the high school community with the curriculum and the training to deliver a 3-year post-secondary program. But because we've also learned that it's not enough to have teachers involved as well as guidance counselors, we are piloting for the first time this fall a version of our program that equips a site director, somebody who's already at that school, who's an admin, already leading this college success work, to implement the program and coach their teachers. Again, really distributing the responsibility of supporting young people to and through post-secondary beyond just a guidance counselor. On the second, for most of our existence, our program has been delivered through teachers in a school in person. Obviously, the pandemic changed that, and we've known that the in-school teacher model was not totally scalable and sustainable. And so because of that, many students may not be able to fit a OneGoal program into their high school schedule and may miss out on accessing this important information. About a year ago, in response to that, my team started to design a personalized learning platform that standardizes much of the experience for young people. So things like providing, core knowledge bases for FAFSA completion, what a selectivity index is, what it means to have a match, why you would choose a 2 or a 4-year program, how you might boost your GPA while you're still in high school so that you're matching to schools that might have a higher likelihood of having you graduate. And so all of this information that for many first-gen students like myself wouldn't have access to. That standardized content is then combined with the individualized plan that we call a fellow journey map. The brief mentions that supports must be tailored to individual student needs. And honestly, OneGoal learned this the hard way. When we first founded this program, we were obtusely focused on a 4-year pathway, pushing all of our students to 4-year institutions. And we didn't do right by many of our students. So today, we know that the most important thing is for students to both understand their options and to make a choice that they are invested in. Our data shows that a student's investment in a post-secondary decision is among the highest predictors of whether or not that young person will complete. Students interact with our program in 3 ways, just real quick so that you have it. Through one-on-one coaching and mentorship by a teacher completed either in person or remotely. We have a personalized platform that allows students to access the content at whatever time they can and from wherever, as long as they have access to the technology, and a community of peers that serve as a family of sorts that we call a network of champions. For us, the pandemic only intensified really the work that we had begun to build to create a sustainable solution that was remote. Districts need that flexibility, and we're meeting them in some ways to ensure that they have the tools that they need. They need programs that can be individualized, that adults can access, not just a counselor, and they need to be trained on how to deliver the type of mentorship that when combined with a solid curriculum can be transformative.
I have to unmute myself. Thanks so much, Patty, for that. We'll have an opportunity to engage in a little more discussion after we hear from our other panelists. I want to turn it over now to Millard House. So Millard, you lead what I believe is the 7th largest school district in Tennessee, in one of the largest not the largest cities, but one of the fastest growing cities in the country. So you were already facing quite a lot before the pandemic, but give us a sense of what you're seeing, particularly among your high school juniors and seniors, what some of the core challenges are that they're facing as they think about post-secondary, that you as a school district are facing as you think about post-secondary.
Vivian, first of all, thank you. Thank you all for having me, Nate, Sara. I appreciate being a part of the esteemed panel here. I'd first of all say that, and just to be frank, I don't believe that we as a school system, as a state, individuals in public education have had the opportunity to do as much as I'd like to see. We all know that COVID-19 has taken a hold on our attention and focus of late. And we've had to shift from answering the question of how we feed students in our neediest communities on a daily basis since school has been out, to now how we provide the extended virtual learning opportunities between February and the end of the school year. Thereafter, we had to shift our attention to changing CDC guidelines, to American Academy of Pediatric guidance, to conflicting politics, and of course, depleted fund balances due to extenuating circumstances that we've been faced with. But nevertheless, I do believe our support for our juniors and seniors started prior to COVID-19. And I think we have to start thinking ahead in public education in reference to what that looks like. We knew ahead of time that approximately 60% of our students in our school system wanted and showed that track record of going to traditional community colleges and universities. We also knew that 40% of our students typically went the route of military, technical trade, or right into the workforce. Our approach in our high schools has been focused on career readiness, even prior to COVID-19, and many of our students having the ability to develop those long-range career goals led by our schools has been huge. We're very fortunate in Clarksville, Tennessee, as Vivian indicated. We are the fastest growing school system and city in the state of Tennessee. We've got companies that have moved here in the last 5 years. like Google, Hankook Tire, Bridgestone Tire, Atlas BX Battery, LG, and others that are actually moving here as we speak. Much like the research brief outlined, many of these companies have had to furlough employees, make major adjustments, and some of those adjustments are really on our shoulders in terms of the agreements that we had in terms of career readiness and job readiness for our students. We've seen the cancellation of one of the most promising externship programs, but we've also seen the expansion of our early teacher residency program with the university that sits right here in our city as well. So there's still a lot that's unknown in reference to where we're going. As I think about our experience right now and what our students are dealing with, realistically, many of our students are still dealing with the social and emotional effects of not having a graduation, not being able to play athletics, not being able to socialize with their friends due to the shelter in places and the very difficult lack ofs that they've had in front of them socially. There's been a shift with some of our students that previously had paved the way for themselves to move directly into the job market. Some of the students are rethinking their plans and whether they need to move forward in higher ed, especially though that 40% that were focused on moving and working in some of our factories that were looking to be trained in some of our career tech programs as well that had jobs waiting on them. We're in the process of partnering with our county to start Zoom conversations with many of our students, especially our juniors and seniors right now, to really give them a venue to have an opportunity to get it out, to also be advised around what's available and what can happen next in terms of their next steps. We've, in Clarksville specifically, we've gone from a 2% unemployment rate to a 11% unemployment rate in a very short amount of time. And that's huge. And I know the rest of the country is dealing with that as well. We understand that this is not a quick fix, and some of the companies may have a lasting effect in reference to the pandemic and beyond 2020. We plan to focus our strategies of communication, first of all, on our students. It's important that we reach out and re-engage not only with students, but also our companies to have a better understanding of their strategy for organizational recovery, to give us a better idea of what they will have available for our kids in the future so that we can show our students whether they need to head in that direction or not. One of the strategies that we currently are working on for our juniors and graduating seniors is developing an organized job fair, especially for those seniors that have just graduated. We believe that we can help at least galvanize our local companies to collectively give our community a better understanding of exactly how fast they will recover or not, because some of them, may end up shutting their doors at some point. We also think it's going to be very, very important to support the class of 2020, much like the research brief speaks to, with a continued effort around counseling and career support. That piece is going to be so important. And even though we haven't had the opportunity to engage in it as much as we wanted to, it's definitely something that we will focus on. We quite frankly don't have a great handle as of yet on the recovery plan of each one of our major companies around us that exists in the community. We need to have a better idea of whether whether they will be shutting their doors, like I said, or whether some of them will be expanding. It's been interesting to hear from a company like LG, where in the beginning of the pandemic, they were furloughing people. They were laying some people off. And now they've indicated they need to hire 200. So it's been interesting to watch the tug and pull of the timing of many of our companies. One of the questions that we've asked ourselves is, where will the jobs be and what companies they'll be with fastest. And that's the question we're going to be pushing with our community partners and companies that are out there. We are the fastest growing community in the state of Tennessee. Like I said, our community sold over 18 brand new homes in the last 6 months. And as a school district, we grew by 1,200 students last year. That trend will continue to be, but it will be extremely important for us to ensure that we have a career landing pad for those that are being educated in our school system. And we're looking forward to making a concerted effort that happens.
Thank you so much, Millard, for that really helpful picture of what your district is going through. And I suspect that many of the folks in our audience today are resonating and nodding their heads along with you. And one of the things that occurs to me as I hear you talking is that school districts are dealing with so many things at the same time, and there are so many needs. And so I do want to call the audience's attention to the fact that EdResearch for Recovery is issuing many briefs. There will be a stream of briefs that are coming out, including on some of the topics that Millard has also raised, like social emotional learning. Because as you said, Millard, as juniors and seniors think about their post-secondary plans, you know, maybe one of the foremost things on their minds or that of their parents and their teachers is just how well they're doing socially emotionally. And so there are also research briefs coming down the pike on those topics. But let's turn to this brief for now. And I'm going to turn it over to Sade to talk to us a little bit about what do we know from research? We have been doing research on these topics for a good number of decades, right? And we do know a few things that should be helpful to school leaders, district leaders, as well as the technical assistance providers and PD providers that are supporting those schools.
Thanks, Vivian, and thanks to Sara and Nate for all their organization that has gone into all of this. And I also want to note that that my co-authors, Celeste Carruthers and Dominique Baker, are available in the chat to help respond to some questions. And we're obviously integral. It was an integral partnership to produce this brief with Celeste and Dominique. A real pleasure to work with them. I want to note that Patty made some really interesting points in how the K-12 system has underinvested in college advising, particularly for first generation students from low socioeconomic backgrounds prior to the COVID pandemic. We as researchers know that it's well sort of documented that students have suboptimal outcomes when they're first generation. They don't have folks in the community or in their household to turn to for advice and support. And so we know that access to counselors and advice is really particularly important for those students. And we focus our brief on sort of addressing that there's a gap there. Although advice is important, right, for all adolescents. You know, virtual and in-person advising programs run by nonprofits like Bottom Line, College Advising Corps, are two other ones that we talk about in our brief, have really improved the quality of the post-secondary institutions that students attend, which results in increased completion rates. So we're not necessarily just concerned about students getting through the application gauntlet and showing up, but we want them to succeed and graduate and not be saddled with debt that they might not be able to pay. However, we also are cognizant of the fact that few school districts have strong partnerships with these type of organizations or have the resources to engage in these really intense advising models. Patty also mentioned, I think this is really important, the importance of knowing the local context. And I think we heard about that from Millard as well, which is that, you know, our brief finds that some of these programs that have been studied that were devised for a particular district or area don't necessarily have the same effects when we try to implement them elsewhere. And so this idea that cookie cutter solutions might, you know, are probably unlikely to to be the solution for every school district. And so in that vein, I just wanted to say, if I were a district leader or principal, I would really think about convening a task force of high school counselors, principals, and teacher leaders to create a concrete plan for how the school or district is going to approach advising for college and career readiness in this upcoming year. And I would start that work now. I think the task force can look to our brief as a start in looking at concrete steps. One thing we mentioned is updating the school profile so that colleges understand how the pandemic has affected student opportunities to learn. Provide students support this upcoming year in drafting their own statements about how COVID-19 has affected them as they walk through the college application process. And use toolkits like those provided by the Strategic Data Project. There's a summer melt handbook to develop digital outreach to 11th and 12th graders. So we have links in there for guides on concrete steps that schools and districts can take to help 11th and 12th graders make the transition while supporting them throughout the school year. We just really want to highlight that the proactive outreach to students and using existing data that school districts already have to identifying college capable students and those who need support in the application process is going to be really integral to making sure that there's not a drop off in post-secondary attendance. Someone noted in the chat, well, what about postponing enrollment given that there's going to be this shift to online instruction? Millard also mentioned that already 40% of students in his district, right, are going directly into the labor force or into the military. But we also know that nationally around 70% of students graduating seniors do enroll in college. So I think it's important to sort of contextualize that many students are looking to go to college. Given the severe economic downturn that Millard was noting and that Vivian was referencing, we know that students are going to be facing far and few career opportunities at this point, which is going to make, as Millard noted, college access particularly salient. And so I think it's really important for those considering delay, for school district leaders in talking with families and students who are considering delaying due to online instruction, health concerns, financial challenges, to think about what the next best alternative is for student time. And we discuss a couple of options like AmeriCorps that actually helps provide post-secondary support after students do service opportunities. And I'm sure there are many others in different localities. But we do know from research that students who delay enrollment tend to have lower completion rates. And so we really wanted to caution, we understand the economic and health realities of the pandemic, but also want to caution that what we know from, as Vivian sort of said, decades of research is that enrolling seamlessly directly after high school into a post-secondary option, there seems to be some momentum there. And the higher education system, frankly, is set up for that type of student and doesn't necessarily do well with supporting students who don't fit that mold. The last piece that I wanted to note that I think Millard was mentioning too is what kind of jobs should we be focused on? So if school districts are thinking about students who might be looking towards careers anyway, or what's going to be helpful for students in general is that lessons from all the past recessions show that surviving companies and where the job growth has been is in technology and technology intensive arenas. And so, we think that advising students to upskill in today's technologies and to move away from training that can easily be replaced with technology is going to be particularly important. And I'll pause there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sade. So we're going to soon turn to the audience for questions. Before we do that, I want to give each of these panelists an opportunity to offer some advice, kind of some summative advice. And in particular, let me start with Millard and Patty to say, what is one key piece of advice that you would offer to district or school leaders right now as they've got their high school juniors and seniors on their mind and they're thinking about their post-secondary plans? Let me ask you to do that. And then Sade, because you already answered that question, I'm going to flip the script on you and say, what would you advise them not to do? Because just as important as what to do is what should we be avoiding? Because and certainly districts can't do everything right now. So what are strategies that they should avoid? Okay, so we're going to start with what to do and then shift a bit to what not to do. So Millard, could I invite you to begin?
Absolutely, thank you, Vivian. The first thing I would say is something that the research brief really outlines well, and it's just ensuring that stronger systems and processes around counseling, specifically those 11th and 12th grade students, and bringing them back, providing those opportunities for them to come back for advice around career coaching, as well as contingency plans that align to the current job market specifically. They need to know how to make those pivots. I think the preparation that we've prepared them for has been, especially in our school district, has been in one particular area. We have academies at every school. And so they've been on this focus, straight path for so long. And we need to now show them how to make these shifts and what that advice looks like. And that takes an organized approach in doing so. I also believe, additional reach outs to these older students, the 11th and 12th graders, even that much more is important after these conversations. So there has to be a consistent path of communication. It can't just be, one opportunity. We've moved forward to plan some job fairs for our 11th and 12th graders, and we're going to take that approach to bring employers in, have our 11th and 12th graders be a part of those job fairs and counseling advisement as well. So I think that's going to be extremely important to concentrate on that group of students, ensure that they learn how to pivot and what the research job market is telling us and where they can eventually land their hats on opportunities when it's all said and done.
Thank you so much, Millard. It reminds me of some work that has been going on in Boston where researchers on a rapid response basis have been surveying local employers, in this case to help them design their summer youth employment programs. But it strikes me that kind of rapid work of surveying employers could also be helpful for thinking about high school juniors and seniors in their post-secondary career paths. Let's turn to Patty.
Sure. I'll keep it quick so that folks can ask questions. I've got two pieces of advice. One for district leaders like you, Millard. I would say make the choice to continue or increase your investment in post-secondary supports. I think it's easy to deprioritize. This is not the time to do that. And so I'd encourage folks to really make the tough choice of continuing to invest in those types of supports. For principals, there are teachers right now who are already advising your young people on their post-secondary plans. What OneGoal has found over and over again is that when we partner with schools, the teachers who end up teaching our program have been doing this work for years. And so they exist, they're already out there. You principals have an opportunity to bring them in to see what they need, to see the training, the supports, the systems that they might need that would allow them to continue this type of support even in the midst of a pandemic.
Thanks so much, Patty. Okay, Sade, what should we stay away from?
I think I guess I'm going to echo what others have said, which is that disinvesting in student support, this is not the time to disinvest from that. Students need more support now than ever, given the economic situation, given the health and mental health concerns that are going to be cropping up. So students need more supports. And I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of a connection with an adult who has been through the process. And we have lots of those in our K-12 school system, right? Almost every teacher, all administrators, there are many adults around who can assist, who've been through the process and can be a resource. And so I think we have to maybe, not forget that there is capacity, and we have to think about how to mobilize it, but disinvesting or thinking about supporting students and launching them into successful livelihood is not a priority. That shouldn't be deprioritized.
Thank you, Sade. All right, I am now going to turn it back over to Sara Kerr, who has been monitoring the chat box for all of your questions, and she is going to field that Q&A session.
Great. Thanks, Vivian, and thank you to all of our speakers today. That was really great. I love the specificity, the level of specificity we got to, some really concrete actions, both that folks in schools and districts and states can take, as well as some considerations for things perhaps not to do, not to back off of. So I'm going to read a couple of questions out loud. I think we'll probably have time for just one or two of them, but I want to encourage us to continue this conversation, and in our follow-up, we'll share some ways that we think we can do that with those of you who are joining us today who are interested. So the first question I'll raise, and I'll invite whomever of the speakers that feels like they want to jump in first to respond to it, is specifically about how we should be looking at supporting marginalized communities and students with disabilities and their families, in particular when considering this transitional time. And the question also said, they're thinking about social emotional needs, independent living, financial mentoring, changing job markets, etc. So does anyone have thoughts on particular supports, especially rooted in the research for the transition time for students in these communities, students with disabilities or other marginalized communities?
I can start. Our program is rooted in culturally relevant pedagogy. And so everything that we teach and every component of our 3-year model really anchors in the student's identity and what their individual needs are and how we position them to successfully transition out of high school and into a post-secondary pathway. The model spans across 3 years, and so we enroll students junior and senior year of high school and then continue that mentorship and support that first year after they leave, because we know that in that year, there are any number of obstacles that can come up for a young person who is from an underserved community. And so for us, it's important that A, they understand that this is normal, like, you're not alone, you're not, an anomaly in any way. And B, that they have a network of champions and resources that they can access to ensure that they have the supports that they need.
Great. So super helpful. I'm going to ask one or two more other questions, try and get to a few more other questions. And I think we will try and invite our panelists to work with us to follow up on some of these and send them out to folks afterwards. We're getting a lot of really great questions coming in, and we will run out of time to answer them all. I'd love to put one more out to the group, to the extent that anyone on this conversation can answer this, but curious to the extent to which of states or local school districts, who's using their coronavirus relief funds, the federal funds, to provide student supports, mentoring, monitoring, advising. Is that something that's happening? Or if you're not fully aware, is it something that should be happening, in what ways? And Millard, I'm seeing you nodding, so maybe you can respond.
Yeah, and that was a conversation that several school systems and charter school organizations that we're really thinking about. And we chose to, after doing the research, versus starting summer school programs, we decided to place them programs because we knew there was going to be needs in every school, and even more needs with our highest need schools and lowest socioeconomic communities. We placed utilizing those funds after school programs in every one of our schools. So we also have moved forward and are doing a research project around what a 4-track year-round school could look like, so that we can get extended time with our kids. As a former principal, I ran a year-round school that went from one of the worst in the state in terms of performance to one of the best in the states. But this is for a different reason. We have the lack of capacity because our buildings are not big enough for the number of kids that we have. And then we have this learning loss that many of our kids are struggling with across the country and will be struggling with. So we think we have to stay ahead of the curve. And we believe the counseling element and the career support element can be included in this as well. So that conversation is still ongoing, but we do know that we are setting up after school programs to support kids academically and from a counseling standpoint.
Thanks, Millard. We are right at time, and I know there are a number of questions coming in that we will run out of time to answer, but we would love to continue to engage our invited guests and speakers today in conversation offline, follow up with folks who participated today via email afterwards to respond to some of those really good questions. I think we are, finding ourselves in an environment with an incredible amount of questions and also lots of trade-offs to be made. And our hope with this project is that as we're considering those trade-offs and those questions, we can, to the extent possible, turn to the available research and use that to help guide us both in terms of decisions that we're making about what we should be doing and investments we should be making to support students and teachers, and also things that perhaps we might reconsider based on what the research evidence says. So thanks everyone so much for joining us today. We will have the recording from today's conversation up on our website. As Nate mentioned at the top of our conversation, we welcome any and all feedback on today's conversation, on the project writ large, topics you'd like to see included in the future, and you can do that on our website, which we included in the chat box. So one big final thank you to our moderator and all of our panelists who joined us today, as well as all of you who joined us from across the country to participate in this discussion, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you all.